Okay, so have you ever stopped to wonder who or maybe what is making some of the biggest decisions about your life? Well, it might just be an invisible architect, one that's quietly building the world around us. Artificial intelligence. And no, this isn't science fiction anymore. It's a real, powerful force that's already at work, but a lot of how it makes its decisions is completely hidden from view. So let's pull back that curtain. Think about it, the way you get a loan, the medical care you receive, even the cars on our roads. AI systems are the engines humming in the background. They're built to spot patterns and make predictions on a scale that we humans just can't wrap our heads around. And they're influencing pretty much every major industry out there.
And this isn't some abstract, far-off idea. We're talking about real, life-altering decisions. An algorithm can play a huge role in whether you get that job interview, if you're approved for a new credit card, or even in helping a doctor diagnose an illness. This invisible architect is getting personal, and its blueprints are affecting all of us directly.
So if AI is making these incredibly important calls, how does it actually, work? This gets us to the heart of the challenge, what experts call the black box problem. We can see the information that goes in, and we can see the decision that comes out, but that whole process in the middle, it's often a total mystery.
The tech behind all of this is usually something called machine learning. See, instead of a person writing a bunch of if-then rules, we just feed a computer a mountain of data and tell it to learn the patterns for itself. The results can be amazingly accurate, but the logic it comes up with can be so tangled and complex that even the people who built it can't fully explain it.
Let's try to break this black box down. It all starts with the input, and that input is you. It's your data, your financial history, the resume you submitted, maybe even your zip code. The system sucks in all these different variables to build a profile. And here it is, the mystery box itself. Inside, the algorithm is sifting through all that data, weighing it, finding connections and patterns it learned from all the data it was trained on. But the actual why, like which specific facts were most important and how they were all combined, that's often buried deep inside layers and layers of complicated math.
And finally, you get the output. The system spits out a decision. Loan denied. High risk. Not a good fit for the job. It's just a clean, simple answer that came out of a deeply complex and, often invisible process. But what happens when that process gets it wrong? Well, because these systems are trained on data created by humans, they can actually learn our own biases, our own prejudices, and then they can apply them with terrifying speed and scale. This isn't just a what-if scenario. It has real damaging consequences for people.
One of the most talked about examples of this comes from the U.S. criminal justice system. Back in 2016, a huge investigation by ProPublica found serious bias in a risk assessment tool called Compass. This software was being used to predict how likely a defendant was to commit another crime.
Now, look at these numbers. This is where it gets really wild. The algorithm was wrong for both groups, but how it was wrong is what matters. Black defendants who did not go on to commit another crime were almost twice as likely to be incorrectly flagged as high risk. At the same time, white defendants who did go on to reoffend were way more likely to be incorrectly labeled low risk, so the mistakes themselves were biased. And here is the really tricky part. The algorithm wasn't explicitly told to use race, but it figured out how to use other things as proxies, things like zip codes or previous encounters with police, which are so closely tied to race in the data that it ended up being discriminatory anyway. And that makes this kind of bias incredibly hard to find and get rid of. This just goes to show you how messy this problem is, because even the experts can't agree on what fairness really means. Do you want the risk scores to be calibrated so a score of 7 means a 70% risk for everybody, no matter the group? Or do you want the error rates to be balanced so it makes mistakes about different groups at roughly the same rate? Here's the kicker. Mathematically, you often can't have both at the same time. Okay, so the risks of the black box are pretty clear. And because of that, governments, researchers, and activists are all starting to demand to see the blueprints. There's this huge global push for rules and frameworks to make AI safer, fairer, and a whole lot more transparent. One of the biggest moves came from Europe with its GDPR law. It basically created a right to an explanation. So for those big automated decisions, like that loan application we keep talking about, you have a right to get a human to review it and to get a real explanation of the logic that led to the decision. It's a huge step toward accountability.
Over in the U.S., the National Institute of Standards and Technology, or NIST, put together a voluntary AI risk management framework. Now, this isn't a law like GDPR, but it's meant to be a practical handbook to help companies build and use AI more responsibly.
The NIST framework boils down to 4 main ideas, all designed to create this cycle of constant improvement. First, you govern. That means creating a culture that cares about this stuff from the very top. Then, you map. You figure out the context, identify exactly where things could go south. Next, you measure. I mean, you can't fix what you can't see, right? So this is all about actively testing and monitoring for bias and other problems. And finally, you manage those risks by actually doing something to fix the problems you find.
So when you look at all of these different efforts, a few key principles start to pop up again and again. We need a human in the loop, especially for high-stakes calls. We have to be constantly on the lookout for bias, not just check for it once and call it a day. And we have to be honest about what an AI can and can't do, so it's crystal clear who's responsible when things go wrong.
All right, so what does all of this mean for us, for our day-to-day lives? How do we make sure this invisible architect is actually building a future that we want to live in? I think if there's one thing to take away from all this, it's that this is not just a coding problem. It's a people problem. Technology always reflects the values of the society that creates it. So if we want to fix AI bias, we have to confront our own societal biases. Building trustworthy systems means we need public conversations, diverse teams, and all of us demanding accountability from the companies using this tech.
So as this invisible architect keeps building and shaping our world, the final question really isn't just for the developers or the politicians, it's for all of us. What kind of world do we want it to build? And what are we going to demand to see on the blueprints?